How the CIA toppled a democratically elected government in 24 hours. Imagine you wake up one morning, and by sunset, your country's government is gone. Not because of a war, not because of a revolution, but because a foreign intelligence agency operating in the shadows, spending less than $1 million, decided your elected leader was inconvenient. That is not fiction. That is exactly what happened in Iran on the 19th of August, 1953. In less than 24 hours, the CIA and British intelligence dismantled the world's first democratic government in the Middle East. They replaced it with a king they could control. And the consequences of that single day are still shaking the world right now. From Tehran to Washington, to every gas pump on Earth. This is the story of Operation Ajax. And once you understand it, you will never look at the word democracy the same way again. To understand why this happened, we need to go back to a world still trembling from World War II. Back to 1953, when the Cold War was not a history lesson, it was a daily, terrifying reality. On one side, the United States, the self-declared champion of freedom and democracy. On the other, the Soviet Union, a communist superpower with ambitions to spread its ideology across the globe. Every country in between was a battlefield, not fought with tanks and bombs necessarily, but with money, propaganda, coups, and intelligence operations. Now picture Iran, a country sitting on one of the largest oil reserves on the planet, a country strategically positioned between the Soviet Union to the north and the Persian Gulf to the south, a country that both superpowers desperately wanted in their corner. And in 1951, Iran did something that shocked the entire Western world. They elected a man named Mohammad Mosaddegh as Prime Minister. Mosaddegh was not a communist. He was not a radical. He was a 69-year-old lawyer, a Democrat, a nationalist, a man who wore three-piece suits and sometimes conducted press conferences from his bed because of chronic illness. Time magazine called him the Man of the Year in 1951. But he had one idea that made the British and Americans furious. He wanted to nationalize Iran's oil. Here is something most people do not know. Before 1951, almost all of Iran's oil was controlled by a British company, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which would later become BP. The deal was an embarrassment. Britain took roughly 85% of the profits. Iran received a fraction of what their own natural resource was worth. Iranian workers in the oil fields lived in shacks without running water, while British employees lived in a guarded, air-conditioned compound with a swimming pool and a hospital. When Mosaddegh became Prime Minister, he stood before the Iranian parliament and made a simple argument. He said, "This is our oil. It is under our land. It belongs to our people." The vote to nationalize was unanimous. The Iranian people celebrated in the streets. For the first time in modern history, a developing nation had taken back its own resources. Britain was furious. They called it theft. They called it communism. They imposed a devastating economic blockade, cutting Iran off from international oil markets and freezing Iranian assets abroad. And when the blockade was not enough, when Mosaddegh refused to back down, when he expelled British diplomats and stood firm, Britain went to the United States. They walked into the CIA and said, "We need your help to remove this man." And at first, President Truman said no. But then came 1953, a new American president, Dwight Eisenhower. and a new CIA director, Alan Dulles. And the answer changed. What the CIA designed was elegant, cynical, and brutally effective. The operation was codenamed Ajax by the Americans and Boot by the British. The man running it on the ground was a CIA officer named Kermit Roosevelt Jr. Yes, the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt. He slipped into Iran under a false name and began spending money. The strategy had three pillars. First, destroy Mossadegh's reputation. CIA agents hired Iranian journalists, newspaper editors, and religious leaders to publish attacks on Mossadegh. They planted stories claiming he was a communist, an atheist, a puppet of the Soviet Union. None of it was true. All of it ran on the first pages. Second, manufacture chaos in the streets. Paid provocateurs, men hired by the CIA, posed as Mossadegh supporters and attacked mosques, beat up religious figures, and committed acts of violence in his name. The goal was to make the population believe Mossadegh was dangerous, that Iran was collapsing under his leadership. Third, win over the military. Roosevelt personally bribed Iranian army generals, offering them money, status, and promises of American support if they moved against Mossadegh. And then there was the Shah. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi was the king of Iran, but he was a weak, uncertain man who had been sidelined by Mossadegh's parliament. The CIA convinced him to sign two royal decrees, one dismissing Mossadegh, one appointing a new prime minister loyal to the Shah and to the West. The Shah was terrified. He signed the decrees, then fled Iran to Rome, waiting to see if the plan would work. August 19th, 1953. This is the day. It begins before dawn. CIA-funded organizers move through the bazaars of Tehran, handing out money, paying street gangs, wrestlers, circus performers, and hired crowds to take to the streets. By morning, the streets of Tehran are filled with mobs. Some are genuine, Iranians who have been convinced by weeks of propaganda that Mossadegh is destroying their country. Many are paid. They carry pictures of the Shah, they shout for the monarchy, they attack government buildings. Military units loyal to the Shah, generals who had taken CIA bribes, begin moving toward key positions in the city. Radio stations, telephone exchanges, the army headquarters. Mossadegh's government tries to respond. Loyal troops are sent into the streets. There is gunfire. People die. For a few hours, it is genuinely unclear who will win. But the CIA's money had done its work. Military unit after military unit defects. The crowds grow. The generals converge on Mossadegh's private residence. Mossadegh manages to escape over a back wall in his pajamas. He will surrender the following day. By the evening of August 19th, it is over. The new CIA-approved Prime Minister takes office. The Shah's private plane lands back in Tehran. He is greeted as a returning hero. He will go on to rule Iran for 26 more years, with American support, with American weapons, and with a secret police force called Savak that will imprison, torture, and kill thousands of Iranians who dared to oppose him. Total cost of the operation? Approximately $2.4 million. Time elapsed from first coup attempt to final success, roughly 24 hours of active street operations. Democracy? Gone. Now, here is what the history books often skip. 1953 did not end the story. It began a chain of events that every single person alive today has been affected by, whether they know it or not.
The Shah ruled Iran until 1979, and his rule, backed by American dollars and American silence, became increasingly brutal. His secret police arrested dissidents. Newspapers were shut down. Elections were manipulated. Thousands of political opponents disappeared. And as the Shah became more oppressive, the opposition became more radical. The moderate secular Democrats had been destroyed in 1953. What rose in their place was something harder, angrier, more extreme. In 1979, a revolution swept the Shah from power. And this time, the movement that took control was led by Ayatollah Khomeini, an Islamic cleric who despised the West and who understood deeply that the United States had destroyed Iran's democracy once before. The new Islamic Republic of Iran declared America the Great Satan. They seized the American embassy and held 52 diplomats hostage for 444 days. That hostage crisis destroyed Jimmy Carter's presidency. It helped elect Ronald Reagan. It poisoned U.S.-Iran relations for decades. Those poisoned relations led to sanctions, proxy wars, nuclear standoffs, and a region-wide power struggle that continues today. And ordinary Iranians, who never voted for any of this, who never wanted any of this, have lived with the consequences of one CIA operation for over 70 years. For decades, the CIA denied everything. The official American position was, "We had nothing to do with it." Mossadegh fell because Iranians turned against him. The coup was organic. Iran made its own choices. This was a lie, and the CIA knew it was a lie. In 2013, 60 years after the coup, the National Security Archive obtained declassified CIA documents that confirmed every detail of the operation. The agency officially acknowledged that Operation Ajax was, in their own words, explicitly a U.S. and British operation to remove Mossadegh from power. In 2013, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry acknowledged the history. In 2023, the British Foreign Office offered its own quiet acknowledgement. But acknowledgement is not accountability. No one was charged. No reparations were paid. No formal apology was issued to the Iranian people. Mossadegh himself died under house arrest in 1967. He spent the last 14 years of his life confined to his estate, forbidden from speaking publicly, forbidden from leaving. The man Time magazine called a hero. The man whose only crime was wanting his country's oil to belong to his country, died a prisoner.
Iran was not an isolated incident. In 1954, 1 year later, the CIA overthrew Jacobo Arbenz, the democratically elected president of Guatemala. His crime? Trying to redistribute land from the United Fruit Company, an American corporation, back to Guatemalan farmers. In 1960, the CIA was involved in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected Prime Minister of the Congo. His crime? Being too independent, too Pan-African, too unwilling to be a Cold War pawn. In 1973, the CIA backed a military coup in Chile that overthrew Salvador Allende, the democratically elected socialist president. General Augusto Pinochet took power and murdered thousands. The pattern is consistent. When a foreign government made choices that threatened American or Western economic interests, regardless of whether those choices were democratic, legal, or popular, the CIA was authorized to remove them. This is not a conspiracy theory. These are documented, declassified, officially acknowledged historical facts.
The question is not whether it happened. The question is what we do with the knowledge that it did. You might be thinking, that was 70 years ago. Why does it matter now? Because the instability in the Middle East that dominates the news every single day has roots in 1953. Because Iran's relationship with America, the sanctions, the nuclear talks, the constant tension, traces directly back to a day when the United States betrayed a democratic government because oil was more valuable than principle. Because the anger that fuels anti-American sentiment across the developing world did not emerge from nowhere. It emerged from history, from moments exactly like this one. And because democracy, real democracy, requires more than elections. It requires powerful nations respecting the right of smaller nations to make their own choices, even choices they disagree with. When that principle is abandoned, no one is safe. Not Iran, not Guatemala, not Chile, and ultimately, not America itself. Mohammad Mosaddegh once said, "Our long years of suffering have taught us that laws are not respected merely because they are laws. They are respected because people are willing to fight for them." He was right, and he lost anyway. The least we can do, the very least, is remember what happened, understand why it happened, and refuse to look away from the truth. If this story made you think, share it. History only changes things when people know it. I'll see you in the next one.